So previously we added some routes. It's now time to improve our development setup, and I also want to improve error handling, because now we don't handle any errors. First of all, talking about the setup, I don't want to constantly restart the server every time we make a change in our code. For this, we can use a package called Nodemon. Actually, this tool was built to help in developing Node.js applications, but it can be easily used with PHP. It monitors the source code and restarts the application once we change something. We install it globally with npm install-g, then Nodemon. Just download it like this. By default, Nodemon works with JavaScript environment, but we can configure it and adapt it to PHP. Create a config file nodemon.json. Inside, create a JSON object. We don't need verbose mode. We ignore Git and PHP storm files. Then we tell Nodemon that we are going to execute PHP, and we are monitoring changes in PHP files. Okay, the config file is done. Now, instead of typing php server.php, we type nodemon server.php. You see, the output here now looks a bit different than before, and internally it starts our server. If I go back to our request file and try my requests again, they still work because we have a running server. But watch the output if I change something. For example, here I simply add a comment, routes for products. And now if I save this file, you see that Nodemon restarts the server, even though here I didn't add any real logic. But it watches the files and it has seen that I have changed it. It also works for files in subdirectories. For example, here, if I add an empty line and save, it also restarts the server. So this is really convenient. There is no need to manually cancel the server and restart it whenever we make a change. Additionally, I want to handle errors. Let's imagine that something inside our application fails. For example, here inside the router, we throw an exception. Now execute any request. The server fails, we got 500 response, but we have no idea what actually has happened. No information in response and neither here in the console. Let's fix it. When something fails or any request handler throws an exception, the server triggers an error event. We can listen to this event, add a handler which accepts a throwable, and just print it to the console. Let's try. Now we see that something went wrong, but this error also says nothing. Response callback rejected with an exception. Okay, but the reason, the actual exception. Unfortunately, there is no detailed information here. To handle such error cases, we can create our own handler, a middleware. Create a new class error handler. Add a magic method invoke which accepts a request and the next middleware in the chain. We are going to call the next middleware, but at the same time we catch any errors that may happen. In case of error, we return 500 response, and the response body we return a JSON object with an error message. Of course, it is not safe to return actual errors in production, but in our case of development, it is okay. Then open the server, and here, instead of router, we provide an array of middleware. The first one is an error handler that catches all possible errors. Then comes the router that triggers the controller. Now let's try this out. Let's save this, and NodeMon will restart the server. And again, if we send a request, we receive a JSON response with an error message "something went wrong", which is our custom exception. This one here in the router. And with that we got automatic server reloading and error handling. That's a great improvement to our project. What else we can improve here in the project? Maybe these two infrastructure classes, router and error handler, can be moved to their own namespace. Let's name it core, for example. Remove an error from the router and move it to the core. And the same way we move an error handler. NodeMon restarts the server. Nice, it still works. One more improvement that we can make is about response. Maybe you have already noticed that we are repeating the same code again and again. Content type application JSON and the call of JSON encode function. Let's extract it to a custom Json Response class, a wrapper on top of ReactPHP response. Inside the core namespace, create a new class Json Response. The constructor accepts a status code and data. Data can be nullable, for example for 204 no content status code. Inside the constructor, we encode the body and call the parent constructor. Provide a status code, headers and a JSON string. Then, for the most common cases, we can create secondary constructors. For example, now in all our endpoints we return 200 response. Instead of typing 200, we can use a static constructor. Let's name it OK. It accepts data, and inside we create a response with 200 status code. Now we can improve all our controllers and replace responses with our custom JSON response. Done. Now we have an error handler that still uses ReactPHP response. Let's also create our own server error response. Open JSON response and add a new constructor called internal server error. It accepts a string reason. Inside, create a response with 500 status code and provide an array. Then open error handler and replace the response. Done. With that, let's leave it as it is and move back into our project and add more useful functionalities to it.